Hey everyone, welcome to this week's video. Something that I thought would be cool is just to go through some really crazy but true facts about snakes that you probably don't know. Even a lot of us that keep them watch certain behaviors and think, well, this behavior's that, or think this is going on for that, or we anthropomorphize. But let's dive into the real reason behind some of these things and blow some minds, so stay tuned. So for our first crazy fact, I've got the help of this little guy here. He's the T-positive 007 male that I have. He really doesn't like me very much. I carried him outside here and he tolerated that. But once I got him down on the ground, he was done with me. So we're just gonna let him do his thing. Beautiful, beautiful animal. He's just very independent. Since the day that I got him, he hasn't been my biggest fan. But what we're watching right now, you see him tongue flicking. And so what we're going to talk about is tongue flicking and some of the things and reasons that these snakes are doing that. So these snakes use their tongues to smell. They do have nostrils, but those are kind of more vestiges that are left over. They don't really use those in the way that we use our nostrils. So they're tasting the air and using that to figure out smell. So every time he sends that tongue out, he's splitting his forked tongue. And the reason that they do that is their tongue is attached to their Jacobson's organ, and their Jacobson's organ is what processes all this information. And so what happens is when they split that tongue out wide, in some species it's actually wide enough where they can get twice the width of their head. And each side works independently and takes in a smell. And of course now he's not going to tongue flip, but we'll have some pictures that I'll show you guys so you can see his tongue as it comes out and his tongue, you know, nice and wide. I took some different captures, so hopefully we can see some cool stuff here. And so as he splits that wide, he gets those two signals. And what that does is allow him to pinpoint direction. So if a scent is stronger on the left-hand side, then he knows if he's trying to follow that smell, he needs to go left. If the scent is stronger on the right-hand side, vice versa. Now, they found in some species that the male's tongues are actually split longer and wider than the female's tongues. And the reason that is that the males follow chemical signals when it's time to mate that from pheromones that the females are leaving behind. So by having a longer and broader tongue, it allows them to pick up better those scent trails and to better follow those to find the females and have a better chance of finding a mate. So the craziest thing about the whole thing is that even though there's the whole tongue there, it's really just the forked part that helps with this kind of stuff. So even though the entire tongue itself can still smell and still pick up that stuff out of the air, they did an experiment many years ago when it wasn't considered cruel. It's actually horrible, but they cut the forked portion of the snake's tongues off. And what that taught them, what they were able to decipher from that, is that while the snakes were still responding to smell and able to detect smell, they were not able to follow chemical trails. So they weren't able to follow these pheromones. They weren't able to even follow scent trails of mice and use that stuff to track it. So without that directional guidance that comes from the left and right side of the forked tongue, they were not able to effectively hunt or find mates. So that forked portion is very, very, very important to these animals. He's gonna have a fight with a leaf right now. But you can tell out here, his tongue flicks are typically very active. He's picking up on a lot of things. He hasn't been outside since last season, so obviously everything's a little bit new right now. So one of the species that was found to have these longer and wider forked tongues were copperheads. Now, I don't recommend grabbing your copperhead's tongue to try to take a look at how long that's forked and all that. It's not really an advisable plan. But it's cool to think that some snake species, and they assume that probably a lot more than we realize are actually sexual dimorphic in that way, which means that the males and females are physically, visually different. So, you know, you'll see that in certain species where the size is significantly different, or certain, you know, colorations, different things we see in the animal kingdom in snakes. We found some species where the tongue is actually different on males and females. So there's something that's interesting to maybe observe someday and see what we can find in other species. So there's one of your really cool snake facts. So for our second crazy but true snake fact, I've enlisted the help of this little freshly shed Sumatran short-tailed python. Now, I can't remember if this was first shed or second shed for this animal, but it's already darkening up nicely. Still so young, so long to develop. Out in the sunshine today, looking a little nervous, but handling things pretty well. So what we're going to talk about for the second crazy fact is snake venom. And so snake venom is a very interesting thing, and there's a lot of avenues that we could dive into. But what I wanted to focus on is how venom relates to those animals then finding their prey. So what happens is, obviously you've got a rattlesnake, you've got whatever it is sitting there waiting to ambush a meal. Maybe it's an active hunter, depending on the species we're talking about. So typically the entire point of venom is twofold, and really threefold once we get into this fact. But the first one is to obviously incapacitate your prey and to kill it. So that way, unlike pythons who get bitten and scratched and cut up, they bite, they retreat, the prey dies, the animal remains uninjured, less likely that the animal retaliates, the prey item just wants to get away. Whereas a python grabs hold, and so that animal's struggling to escape and can hurt the animal, or other constrictors. It doesn't just have to be a python. We happen to have pythons, so it makes sense. So anyhow, so that's the first function of venom. Now, some venoms actually begin the breakdown process of whatever the animal's eating. So before the animal even starts to digest and the animal gets into the digestive juices, that venom actually starts to break down the prey item to aid in the digestion process. And I've always been curious, and I don't know if there's been enough work done with it, but I'm wondering, you know, if you see people devenomize snakes and do the surgery, I wonder if those animals have digestive issues later on in life, if they live shorter lifespans, or how that affects them, because obviously without envenomating the animal, that initial breakdown hasn't occurred. Now that said, in captivity, those animals are probably being fed frozen thawed or pre-killed prey, so that breakdown process has already started on some level, even if it's just for several seconds before the animal's ingesting, up to, you know, maybe an hour or two if it's a frozen thawed and it had to be thawed, and you know, the process of freezing it. So maybe that equals out. I don't know how much breakdown that's doing. But the third crazy thing now is you have to understand the compound that is venom. And so venom has over 100 proteins, enzymes, peptides, and molecules, and all these different things that comprise it. And so what they were actually able to do in a laboratory setting is to break that venom down. And they found about 85% or so of those peptides, molecules, enzymes, all those things or whatever, are actually involved in either, you know, breaking down that prey or killing the prey. But there was another 10 to 15%, depending on the compounds, that wasn't involved in that process, that wasn't lethal, that wasn't, you know, venom essentially, that wasn't breaking down the food. So they were wondering, what does that do? And what they actually found out is that stuff sends a chemical signal to the snake to help it find the dead prey item. So say it bit a mouse and it ran off 25 feet before it died, the snake will actually do what they call, it's this SICS, I have a note here so I don't forget, it's a strike-induced chemosensory searching. And they found this in western diamondback rattlesnakes specifically, but it's thought to be in many other venomous snakes. So they actually have a fixed pattern that they do after they bite their prey, and they move their head in a certain fashion and do rapid tongue flicks to pick up these signals, to follow that trail that's left by these enzymes, peptides, and molecules and all these things within the venom that's in the animal. And the reason that they know specifically that the animals are following those is because they were able to separate these things and break down the venom. And so they took multiple prey items and they injected one of the prey items with that stuff that's killing it and breaking it down, and then they injected the other ones with the stuff that they were assuming these snakes were following. And they found that the snake showed no interest in the animals that were envenomated with that 85%, but they were heavily interested in the prey that was injected with this non-lethal stuff that seemingly had no purpose. So that was the stuff that's actually triggering the snake on how to find their prey. And so we had known for a long time that these snakes were more interested in envenomated prey than not. So that was obvious, but it wasn't obvious what exactly was going on within the venom to do this. So it's very, very interesting to see that these animals are actually using their venom to send themselves a chemical signal to find that prey item, that they're not actually tracking the scent of the prey item. Because they want to find the specific animal they envenomated. If they were just following the scent of a mouse, they could end up following another live mouse, and it could be an endless journey if they're in a heavily populated area with a lot of prey. So I found that really interesting. That's something that I didn't know. I have a feeling a lot of venomous keepers probably don't know that. So let me know with these facts if these were things that you already knew about, or if you learned something from this. And if you guys really like this kind of stuff, then maybe we can make this a video series as I learn new things or think of things that maybe not everybody knows. I wanted these few to be like really, really cool ones that I don't think a lot of people know, but obviously we could broaden that out depending on the reception. So let's check out the next one. All right, guys, for our last crazy snake fact, we are going to enlist the help of this little guy here. And this little guy is actually a snake that's sold to one of my channel members. Mike, if you're watching, this is your little fella outside today. We'll see how he does out here. So far, so good. He looks pretty curious about his environment. He also looks like he's not going to sit still, but that's all right. So snakes and reptiles in general have this stigma that they're monsters and they're killers and they're not intelligent animals and all of this. And so for many years, it was thought that they didn't care about their young at all. You remember with alligators, people used to think that they were eating their young, when in fact the mothers are very, very careful and move those babies and watch over those babies and protect them for quite a long period of time. So we see this in certain snake species, especially live bearers tend to be more maternal. You'll see mothers watching over their offspring after they are born. There's even some rattlesnake species where they found cooperative maternal behavior, where several mothers are denned up together and they'll take turns watching over all of the offspring. So they're actually not only watching over their own offspring, but they're actually watching over the offspring of other females in there, which is an interesting thing when you think about it, because cooperative behavior typically doesn't make sense. I mean, your goal in life is to get your lines out there and to get your babies, and here they are doing this cooperative behavior, but for whatever reason, wherever those specific species are from, they found that it increases the chances of survival of their offspring by teaming up together and doing something you might see in wolves or in other species that are more of a social creature. So it's surprising to see. We know that rattlesnakes den up together in the winter and things like that, but to see them cooperatively watching over their offspring is pretty incredible. But that's not even the crazy fact that we're going to get into on this one. This is going to go on to the southern African rock python, and they are completely unique to our understanding currently in that they actually watch over their offspring after hatch. So not only do these mothers defend the nest, not only are they helping to incubate these eggs and take care of them, but they're actually staying in these burrows. They're usually in aardvark burrows, things like that, or where they tend to lay their eggs. Obviously abandoned, the aardvarks aren't living in there anymore, or maybe they ate them first. But the mothers are actually not only, we're getting a little wind here, they're not only watching over their offspring, and protecting their offspring, but the mothers will go out, they'll actively bask, come back and huddle up their offspring and transfer the warmth to them. So the offspring can stay in the den, they're not leaving the site, they're not going out and being subjected to predation and any issues. And because they think, because these animals are found in the southern region, they're thinking that the temperatures are a little bit cooler there, and so that's why this maternal stuff is going on to help these babies, and the mothers stay with them through their first shed cycles until the babies are able to go off and start hunting on their own. And so the babies stay around, the mothers watch over them, and that's the only python species we know of currently that does this. Every other python species either lays their eggs and so that's where they are, or they watch over the eggs until the eggs begin to hatch and then they're out. Now, they have found that this takes its toll on the mother African rock pythons, and as a species, they tend not to breed back-to-back seasons. They're actually giving themselves time off in between for their body to recover. So there's some interesting facts there. And obviously with my own snakes, I always try to give their bodies time to bounce back. But we can actually see in the wild that naturally, now that they're putting transmitters on these snakes and following specific animals, that these animals are giving themselves time off and not breeding every year, which is very interesting, because you would think, you know, given the shorter lifespan of the wild, these animals want to propagate as quickly as possible. And we do see that in some species, you know, colubrid species that can have multiple clutches in a season or whatever it is. But some of these larger pythons are trying to preserve themselves for longer and keep their body in better condition so that they can survive the rigors of that process. Because once they're on eggs, they don't leave them. They'll go out to bask outside, come back in, but they're not out actively hunting. They're not pursuing meals until after the babies go through those first sheds and leave. So I thought that was really cool to see how maternal some of these snake species can be. I would love to dive in deeper to the rattlesnake thing. That really interests me. I found snippets of it in some of these other studies that I was reading, but I was not able to get into what species are doing that and how they went about finding that out. But I find that stuff fascinating. So as I said before, get in the comments. Let me know if you learned something. Let me know if you enjoyed this. If you are enjoying the content here, make sure that you're subscribed with your notifications on so you don't miss future content. I hope you guys appreciate it. I'm trying to put in a little more effort, teach myself some minor editing. I obviously don't want to edit out the animals. I want to leave all that stuff natural because I think that's really important. But I do want to get a little bit better at making the content flow better for you and making it a little more interesting. So let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you. Thank you, especially to my members. Thank you, Mike. Hope you enjoyed seeing your little guy here. Obviously, he did really great. He'll get up to you soon as we get some time to meet up there. But he's just a fantastic little guy. See you guys. Thank you.